That's right.
Kathy.
Let's go.
Let me know, Matt, when we're starting to record, and we'll go with the spiel to begin and let you go.
All right, we're good.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephen Hughes, and this evening we're in the July Form-Based Code Advisory Working Group meeting. The Form-Based Code Advisory Working Group advises the county manager on matters relating to the Columbia Pike Form-Based Codes. This evening we have a presentation from the Bank of America site at the corner of Glebe and Columbia Pike. In addition, Mr. Matuzik will give us an update. For those who are not aware, we are meeting virtually this evening at the direction of the county manager, and will continue to do so at the manager's direction. I ask for those not presenting to please mute yourself, turn off your cameras so that we can have the most people, only those who are speaking. For those wishing to be recognized, please unmute yourself and raise your hand, and I will call on you as turn goes forward. With that, Matt, would you like to provide us with your update on the Columbia Pike area?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Before we get to the main agenda item, I just wanted to cover a few things before we all disperse on our summer breaks, unless they already started. But the first one involves some updates to our meeting policy, and it doesn't really impact this group, but you may have heard as of September 1, a lot of the typical committees like Site Plan Review Committee, Long Range Planning Committee, and others will be beginning a hybrid approach to meetings, which is still in development, but the approach involves somewhat of a transition to in-person meeting while still accommodating a virtual component. Without getting into too many details, the policy doesn't really impact this group because, as Stephen mentioned, we advise the county manager, not the county board, and therefore we are exempt from that. So this is a long-winded way of saying we can continue to meet virtually as we have these last 2 years into the second half of the year as those other groups begin their different process. So that was just one minor update in case you're hearing this or already have come across some documents. Does it impact the OG? It does not. Another update, I believe in an earlier meeting, we mentioned Ebony's departure from Arlington County Planning staff. I did want to highlight that we are actively interviewing applicants to fill that position. It's since been elevated to a senior planning position, and we hope to have someone identified later this summer. So I would imagine one of the next meetings we may have in the fall, which we're still debating the agenda topics, that person might be introduced as their primary role, as was Ebony's, would be to monitor a lot of the Columbia Pike activities. So we're looking forward to identifying the right person and having everybody become familiar with them later this year. So with that, I don't have any other further updates, but just wanted to perhaps entertain any questions on what I just covered before we get into the main agenda topic. All right, hearing none, I'm going to briefly share my screen for a second. Unless, Stephen, did you want to say anything before we get going?
No, I was just giving people a hard time for not, giving lampooning questions for you. And it's good lowball too, Matt. Love it.
Oh, man. Let me very briefly just share my screen. And again, I'm only doing this for providing, I think, context before the applicant really gets into the additional details. So bear with me 1 second. All right. Can everybody see that?
I can see it, Matt. We're good.
Yes, we're good.
So as we're going to get into the details of the specific request, we're looking at a form-based code application to redevelop the Bank of America site. This is the northwest corner of Glebe Road and Columbia Pike. As part of that assessment, the applicant has highlighted that they would also be pursuing at the same time a minor change to the form-based code regarding some of the height parameters and frontage types that are located on the Lincoln Street, the western edge of the site. From a staff's perspective, and it's something that I want everybody to kind of be reminded of as you consider all these different changes, we're stepping back for a moment to evaluate, is this something specific to this site? Are other sites potentially impacted by that? So as a precursor to that discussion, what I wanted to do is really give you a sense of how Columbia Pike, generally speaking, in the commercial form-based code, and I know I'm speaking to the choir here, but has identified the greatest heights right on Columbia Pike, and those typically found in the 6-story height restriction begin to taper down in height as you get further away, either to the north or to the south, away from Columbia Pike. And we accomplished that by transitioning from the Main Street designation in our building envelope standards to what we call the local designation, which carries a 3.5-story height restriction. So this exhibit, and the 3 that follow, just give you a sense, some context of where that transition occurs along Columbia Pike. And what I really wanted to highlight is that there's a lot of variations of this. Some sites have an entire block face that has a local designation. Sometimes that transition happens when there's a public road intersection. Sometimes it's when a planned alley is anticipated. And sometimes it's a very shallow distance that perhaps was tied at one point to a property ownership change and various other reasons. So as you can see here, the various blue designations, blue is the local designation in the BES, you can see how some of them begin halfway through the block, some are closer towards the edge, and that kind of varies throughout the regulating plan, very much predominantly in the town center district. However, when we go further west, you can see the George Mason regulating plan. We're not seeing as many of those because the configuration and the size of the district is very different. We still have those transitions. This one from Avenue site to local, and then again from Main Street to local here. And again, further west, Four-Mile Run and Dinwiddie Street, you can see how those transitions, again, from a larger 6 or 5-story height restriction down to a 3.5, begin to occupy the edges of the revitalization district, typically in consideration of what is just outside the district boundary, and kind of continually establishing that gradual height transition. And then finally, in the western gateway, we only have one instance on Greenbrier where Main Street transitions to local. So as the applicant will provide much more information on this, I want everybody to keep thinking about where else could this happen, so that as we continue to review this particular request, we really clarify why in this particular case we may or may not be supportive, so that partly for staff's perspective, but others who might be watching this and discussing it later, we have a clear justification for how we reached our conclusions. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and hand things over to Kathy.
Can you let me share too, Matt?
This is Daniel. Stephen got dropped off, and I think it's being waited.
Thanks, Daniel.
Be admitted back in.
Thanks, Daniel. Sorry, Matt. I got dropped. I apologize.
No, it's all right. Let me see if I can elevate Lauren to be a presenter.
Wow, what do you have for
Okay. Lauren, I think you should be able to share.
All right. So thanks again. For those who perhaps have not met me, my name is Kathy Puskar with Walsh Colucci, and I'm here on behalf of the applicant. I have Lauren Riley, my associate, assisting me. We also have our client, Yuri Blazer, with Marcus Partners, and Tess Crane with KGD, our architect. So as we've discussed, we're working on a form-based code project at the corner of Columbia Pike and Glebe Road. And we're in the preliminary stages of that application. And so we'll be back to you in the fall to discuss that actual proposal in more detail. But this evening, we just wanted to present to you the proposal to shift the BES standard along Lincoln Street to extend that Main Street frontage. Next. So we're right here in the form-based code in the commercial corridor at the corner of Glebe Road and Columbia Pike, and across the street is the Westmont project that's under construction right now. So Marcus Partners is looking to redevelop this site into a Main Street frontage. Next. And this will give you the context of the building footprint. You can see the Westmont Shopping Center to the east of us, and generally where the edge of that existing building is where the new building will be constructed as well. Next. So this gives you a pretty good understanding of where we sit right now. You'll see that the current regulating plan shows a small portion of local frontage along Lincoln Street. You also know, if for those of you who have been doing this for a long time, that we have that Main Street frontage along a majority of the site, and we can push that Main Street frontage 50 feet. So you'll see on Lincoln Street, if we push that Main Street frontage the 50 feet as is permitted under the code, it still results in 57 feet of frontage that has local frontage, which really ends up being an undesirable scenario because there's no real opportunity for a transition because we already have an alley in that area towards the back of the site. So you end up with kind of an empty space. The other thing I want to point out is if you look at Glebe Road, that Main Street frontage on Glebe Road goes all the way to the property line. So the Westmont building, as I mentioned, and you can kind of see the outline of that building, goes all the way to that alley that separates us from our single family neighbors. And so what we are asking is to extend the Main Street frontage for that additional 57 feet to really make us line up with what was done on Glebe Road, have a consistent frontage, and avoid any blank space between our building and the edge, because as you know, we'd have to treat it with a fence. So if we go to the next slide, this kind of shows you the difference between the two scenarios. So on the left, if you had the local frontage there, there's really not much you could do with it except put a wall along that RBL, and then you see the alley beyond there. And on the right, what you'll see is if we extended that RBL all the way, we could actually put units in that location. And then as you step back, have the additional height. You'll also notice that because we are next to our single family neighbors, we have the requirement that we step back for the 40 feet. So we have the alley and then we keep it at a 2-story volume until we hit the 40 feet, at which case we transition upward. Next. Probably a little bit easier to see in this diagram with the massing options. So you can see that if we were able to push that transition zone, we would just extend that 2-story portion and move the rest of the building a little bit northward and still have that transition to the single family homes, similar to the transition that we have at Westmont and elsewhere on the pike where we're adjacent to single family homes. The alternative, once again, is that blank wall at that corner, and it almost makes it look like an unfinished building in that location. Next. And here's a bird's eye view of what that looks like, clearly showing the transition if you extend that Main Street frontage and kind of that little weird carve out if you don't. Next. And an illustrative rendering of the actual building. Of course, we're not going to be talking about the architecture tonight, but we just wanted to give you a better view of what that looks like in reality. We'll be back in the fall to discuss that in more detail. And here's more renderings from other angles. Next.
That's the end.
And that's the end of our presentation. So it really is, and Lauren, maybe just go back to the image kind of showing the RBL difference. Yeah, that'll work.
That's a good one for the discussion. I agree, Kathy. Let's leave that one up.
All right, and that's our request.
All right, thoughts, questions, anyone out there? Matt, anything from staff that you want to highlight that wasn't already highlighted, I presume? You're good.
Yeah, we're good. I think these are really helpful graphics to visually orient everyone. And again, focus our attention on instances where that transition from main to local happens right at a lot line separation between sites that could be developed per the form-based code and sites that are just outside the district. Because as we've noted in the earlier slide, there are other instances where public roads and different sites may be located in that zone. So this is focusing on the unique aspects of this particular instance.
Yeah, and we'd have to look, Matt. I'm not sure how many instances there are where kind of on either side of the property it's offset, right? So we looked at Westmont, and Westmont was consistent, right? The building kind of goes straight across adjacent to that alley with that 2-story step back and then tapering up to the higher height.
All right, I see Steph has her hand up.
I got Steph and Ed. Steph, you want to go first and we'll get to Ed?
Sure. Sorry, sunlight's coming in. So speaking of that, so shadow lines, I realize that shadow lines are not required for the form-based code by requirement, but that would be something I'm looking at because I realize that that is a strange corner for you, but there is a park across the way, and we also have single-family homes. So I realize that those step downs and those setbacks can be difficult for builders at times, but they were designed in order to help keep with the neighborhood manners. So did you guys take a look at the shadow line changes for this? And I realize east-west it's a little bit easier, but do you have any of those?
I don't know that we have that. I'm gonna let Tess answer that, but if we could maybe go to the aerial, because we have Gilliam Place right across the street. Whoops. And if you look at our, well, this doesn't show it well, but that actually that portion, the property that we're redeveloping includes a triangle that is to the north of us on our side of the block. Do we have anything that shows that any better, Lauren?
You can sort of see it.
You can kind of see, so
Here.
there's a home there. So the area where we have that intrusion is actually adjacent to part of the property that's our property. I know that's slightly different than the question you're asking, but that is green space and will stay green space as a buffer between the neighbor. And that probably doesn't show it as well as it could. Can we go to the next slide? And Tess, you'll have to answer whether you have any shadow studies of, I think what Stephanie's saying is the park that's adjacent to the Gilliam on Lincoln. Is that what you're referencing?
Yeah, and so we definitely considered the sun movement and designing the project, but looking actually, if you flip back to that slide where you can see the image of Gilliam, you can see the shadow that it casts. This is going to be a similar height building. So in the, let's see, northeast, in the earlier morning, their shadows will come kind of more across Lincoln Street, swing to the north, and then west in the evening. So actually, Gilliam itself puts an afternoon shadow on that park, and it's really more in the winter months. In the summer, it's a non-issue. So we felt that it wasn't anything that was greatly impacted by these changes in the building massing. It's pretty similar regardless of this change.
So if you go, Lauren, go to the slide that shows kind of the notch versus not, go to the massing again.
Right, because with the notch, it would maybe provide more light in the afternoon when the sun's to the west, but then we'll have the Gilliam shadows coming over this way. So
You're
that will
saying
probably
Gilliam shadows would cancel out any impact?
exactly.
The reason why I bring this up because with Penrose and Sienna and also the Penrose Square development, there was concerns from the neighbors regarding, all of a sudden it went dark, plants died and other stuff. So bringing it up if you can, even though I realize it's not required, to look at those angles, because just because Gilliam already did the large massing doesn't mean that it's ideal. So I'll leave it at that.
So if we did a shadow study, I think what we would do is, I think what it would be helpful, or which would make it would actually make it comparable, is we would have to do the shadow study test. I don't know if you can do it for the Gilliam and us to kind of show how those two shadows come together in the before after, if you don't do the extension and if you do.
Yes, we can get that.
Okay, Ed, then Linda. Ed?
Okay, yeah, this is Ed. I think this is kind of a question probably more towards staff with Matt. but I wanted to ask, um, a number of years ago with the Littman building, they were asking to build pretty much along Columbia Pike with their back facing pretty much the same street. I guess it's 9th Road. And I wanted to, if you could give us a little background as to what happened there. It seems like we couldn't get back. We had an impasse with the back of the building and how high the facade would be on the back side of the building with that particular group of single family homes. And how might this be different than that particular situation, or is it the same situation?
So I can speak to that one, Matt. if
Okay,
you'd like.
great. And I will
Um,
say, I'm asking this because I'd like for us to all be aware of it, because I
Yeah.
would love for this project to be very successful. And I'd hate for someone to come up, 6 months later and say, oh, but what about? I'd rather ask the question
No,
now and let's get an
was
answer.
I was intimately involved in the Littman case and actually ended up testifying in federal district court over that case because the owner wanted us to have to proceed with the project even though it was denied. So what happened with that project is it got caught in the middle. So if you remember, we came in and we built the Halstead, and the Halstead had a mezzanine and it had dormers in the roof. And that mezzanine created an extra floor of residential units. And then there were extra units in the dormer. And at the time, if you read the code, that's what it said. And we quickly learned that those that were involved in developing the code, the community, and said, well, that's not what we meant. And so then we had a working group where we went back, and if you recall, they made it clear that you can have dormers, but you can't add another level of living space in the dormer. So you could use a dormer as an architectural treatment, but you couldn't use it to create additional, say, loft units. And then as to the mezzanine, there was clarification that yes, you can have a mezzanine, but the mezzanine is intended to relate to the commercial floor below. And so it was how that mezzanine could not be an extra floor of units. It had to relate to the level below. So any impacts to the building in that particular instance were related to the dormer and the mezzanine level. And that's what we were debating. So because the project had a contract that relied on the mezzanine and the dormers built the same way they did it in the Halstead, and because the code got changed midstream, we weren't able to come to agreement with the property owner on amending the contract to allow for that change in circumstance. And so we had to go forward with the project as designed. It got denied by the county board, and then we ended up in court. So I think the issue was different in that case.
It does sound like, as you describe it, that this is very distinct from that situation, but I'm glad that you're here on the spot to explain it so we're all aware of it.
Yep. I don't know, Matt, if you have anything to add. I can't remember. Were you here for that one?
I was just going to say, I love discovering and discussing things that predate me. I just suddenly feel younger. Thank you for that.
Thanks.
Oh, okay. Well, I know Intimalis was involved with it. I don't remember. I guess Jennifer was probably involved.
Yeah, and we had a lot of work sessions. We brought the community and the OP members and staff, and I think Chris Zimmerman got involved at some point to try and figure out kind of what those first amendments were. And I think those led to, I want to say maybe, Matt, those were the 2011 amendments, weren't those? I can't remember. Anyway, no, it was probably earlier than that. I take it back. It was a long time ago. To your point, I'm dating myself, so let's move on.
Yeah, but the reality is, it sounds like this is a different situation. We've moved beyond that, and that's a good thing.
I think that's correct. We're meeting the requirement. So the requirement, and remember, adjacent to those single family homes, which has been the consistent requirement, is that you can't, within 40 feet of that space, right, you have to step back and up as we've done here. So we're really just talking about whether you bring that, step closer to Lincoln Street. And then, of course, to Stephanie's point, the 6-story portion does come a little bit closer, but it still meets that 40-foot requirement away from the neighbors, if that makes sense, that you have on any other site that we had on Westmont.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sorry to take so much time, but I think I would add that a lot of those single family homes that are there, when this happened before, more than 10 years ago, we weren't seeing the tremendous redevelopment of housing. But at this point, so many people are taking that 1.5-story Cape Cod and turn it into a 2.5-story. So personally, it seems as if those houses are probably going to be redeveloped at some time in the near future, well, in the foreseeable future anyway. I would
Right,
not
do I-
be surprised if many of those people go up a story anyway.
Do I hear you advocating that we should be able to have 3 stories in that?
No,
portion?
I'm advocating that for your plan as presented, but I think many of the people there that have single family homes
Yeah.
probably are going to,
Oh, I'm just teasing.
Kathy's giving you a hard time for when the rooftop patio looks down upon her client's building there. I kind of got it. It's good.
And
Uh,
I think you can see here better, like that gray area was the area that I was talking about that is actually technically part of this property. So kind of fortunately for us, the impact is in an area that we already own.
Yeah, and I think if I can just add a helpful visual, let me see if I can share my screen. The Google Street View, I think, is quite informative in this case, not always. But this gives you a sense of that adjacent single-family home which faces Lincoln Street, the significant landscaping that the applicant would continue with redevelopment. This driveway is part of their ownership, but not really being redeveloped. And that planned alley, which is the beginning point of the 40-foot separation, really starts closer to where this curb is and going further south. So I think from at least the impacts on the adjacent property, obviously these trees had nothing to do with the park across the street, but I think this was helpful context since we're discussing shadows and light and air.
and Matt, while you're there, could you just remind us on the corner where that little sign is, how tall would the facade of the building, of the proposed building be?
Can you repeat that question on
Uh,
this corner?
He's asking, so where you're visualizing it. She's saying, Ed, you got to remember that what you're looking at here is that triangle beyond the property line. You'd move to
Yeah.
the right to reach to the property line. Then there'd be an alley, and then
Oh,
they'd
there's
go up
still an
2
alley there.
stories.
Okay.
Then it'd be alley. Then it'd go up 2 stories. Then it would go back to the step back, and that step back would end with the vertical facade being 40 feet from the property line. Kathy, correct me if anything I said was incorrect.
No, that's correct, because we're staying off of that parcel where you see that red car. And
Okay.
so I mentioned the alley kind of starting, I don't have the exact dimensions, but that's basically accurate. Got your
Yeah, so
alley, you've got
you got the
this,
25 foot with the alley, and then the 2-story portion of the building is 28 foot 9 inches to the top.
But Tess, the alley itself doesn't start where we're seeing the driveway at the moment. It starts further
No.
to the right.
Right where
and
Matt's cursor is kind of the start of that driveway. And then it goes 25 feet beyond that. So it actually, we're taking building further away where you see the pass under for the bank drive through. You know, we're pulling that back so that their first built, element will actually be slightly further from this existing single family residence.
So just one more second, it does seem that the 25 feet that you're asking for is roughly similar to the existing 2-story house that's already there.
Correct, which is
Good,
the intention
okay.
of the code, that
Perfect.
then it steps up.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, that's all.
Thank you.
And we're going to get to Linda, who definitely might remember that initial conversation, Kathy. And Kathy, I saw just a plug. I look forward to you coming back in the fall, and I hope that we don't have ignoring of that little triangle in the landscaping plan, so we get to see. I hope to see it better than an asphalt plateau. Lynn,
it's been understudy.
Yep, and I know I saw it was outside your property area. I understand, Kathy, but I think it would help us all to see a better vision of that space.
Understood.
Linda, I think you're next, and then we'll go back to you, Steph.
Okay. Kathy did a great job describing what happened with the Littman property. And it was something else. And Chris Zimmerman was definitely involved. He was on the county board. So we're talking way, way back. So Kathy did a great job describing that and what we had to do to figure out, like, well, we didn't mean that, so we better figure out what we really meant and making the changes required. So on this property, I just want to confirm one more time, the triangle, you're going to dig up the asphalt and turn it into some sort of a landscaping, correct?
I believe that is doable. Yuri's here, and Yuri, if you just want to nod or say yes.
Yes, that triangular space would be landscapes.
Could you
Okay,
show us
great.
the diagram, please?
Sure. Can you go back to that, Matt? You had a good image. The aerial.
The street view?
Graham, do you want? Do you want our presentation or do you want the?
The presentation that shows the triangle and the dotted lines. I think
Okay.
that's clearer. Yeah.
Okay.
So that driveway for the bank will be dug up and turned into a nice landscaped area. So that's great to hear. While we're on this slide 6, and it's also referenced earlier, can you please describe what what is being depicted above the 6th floor? You're saying that it's a different building, a proposed other building on a previous slide, and in this one on slide 6, you're showing an additional band of the pinkish gray above floor 6. Can you describe what building that is?
So that is part of our building test. Do you want to describe what's happening there?
Yeah,
Sorry, I
see here.
wasn't quite fully following the question. Where's the pinkish?
She's asking
Okay,
the top floor of the building. So when you're go back to the other image. In the other image, see how it sets back behind there? And she's saying, what is that above the 6th story? But it goes back to the measurement, the grade of the building.
So it's a
Right.
grading issue?
Correct, because there's some slight topography across the site, and so as measured from the Glebe Street side, we're 6 stories, and then as measured from the Lincoln Street side, we're 6 stories. As described in the form-based code, each facade frontage is measured by its adjacent sidewalk, and so we are pushed back 30 feet from that Lincoln Street side, and that is just an extension of that 6th floor from the Glebe Street side. So, technically,
Okay.
if you
Okay.
add it together, you end up, it looks more like 7 stories, but that's because of how it is calculated in this form-based code.
Okay, all right. Let's see, slide 8. The loading dock, the screening wall, retaining wall. I'm curious about why the retaining wall. Well, now I know you're going to develop the triangle into a landscaped area, so you're going to stop the wall. Okay. My only concern.
Oh, sorry.
My only
alley. Pardon me.
My only concern is in the back, as usual, we brought this up on other projects, the loading docks and the garage entrances in terms of headlights at night that would be shining into single family homes or multifamily homes. And so that I'm just putting that out there as usual, like all the other projects, in terms of the height and the composition of the retaining / screening wall and the ramps that come out of garages, the angles, so that we don't end up with folks getting headlights into their houses. So the same concern was expressed.
Yeah, we think we're good on that. We will be prepared to discuss that more in the fall.
Okay. Just wanted to confirm Gilliam Place and Westmont. In both of those cases, since they do have the same challenge that they were facing of single family homes, we didn't need to make any special accommodation for those 2 projects. Is that correct, Matt? For Gilliam and for Westmont, that the north end of those projects, there wasn't any special anything special that had to be done beyond the standard 40 feet within the property line, et cetera. I just want to confirm.
That is true for Westmont. I believe Gilliam Place, much like Pike 3400 further south, did utilize the currently permitted 50-foot extension of the main street. They probably didn't need all 50 feet. I think it was really, maybe like half of that. I forget. Luckily, we had their architects here. But that was a part of the request as you look at the northern end before you get to their alley for Gilliam Place.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you look at the form-based code plan, Gilliam Place had a little bit more unique shape to their property, that alley had to be down where it's located, so they weren't able to utilize all the way up to that district boundary. But because of our property shape, we're able to utilize all the way up to that district boundary.
But I
Okay.
think it's pretty common that historically we have pushed that line. We did it on Pike 3400. We pushed it, I think, on like pretty much every area that has a Main Street frontage where it makes sense. We push that line 50 feet.
Yeah, I have no problem with the 50 feet. My only concern, as usual, is whenever we're going to be butting up right against single-family houses. And in the case of Pike 3400, they went to flats and then they went to townhouses. So you automatically, we didn't have the height and bulk massing like for these. Okay. I think that's all the questions I've got. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Linda. All right, I'm gonna go back to Steph. It says you still got your hand up. Then I've got Leo who's got his hand up, and then Ed, you still got your hand up. We'll go back to you. Steph, you're up.
Okay. So a consideration for zoning typically with single family homes and with other buildings, usually a corner abutting when you're joining two different districts, the corners have lower requirement, like height requirements, like your fence has to be lower, and other gradings have to be lower. So when looking at that corner, and I'm trying to figure out how to like make this, accommodating for the neighbors behind it and too, but usually corners do have special treatments with lower, more restrictive height requirements. We do it a lot with the fence. Even if when you're on a corner, it has to be much lower height than if you're abutting back to a normal sized house behind you with a 6-foot fence versus a 3-foot fence. So that is a zoning consideration. And I realize that the zoning folks have some leeway over us, but it is very different. So that's just a consideration of, being a nice neighbor on the corner, because you want to have some of those sight lines, even though it is a commercial district too. So corners are weird. And then I would also ask for the representative from this neighborhood, have you guys had any feedback from your community members about this? On Penrose, the main gist was, oh God, not another tall building. But this one's not our neighborhood.
I'm going to phrase it differently. Kathy, have you reached out separately to the Arlington Heights or Alcova Heights Civic Association on this one yet and provided them with a presentation at all?
Lauren, I don't believe we have yet, because we were in the first submission and we got comments back and we're getting ready to do our second submission. So we didn't feel like we were in a place, I think. But Lauren, correct me if I'm.
That's correct, Kathy. We haven't reached out yet. We were waiting until we were further along in the design process.
Okay, great. And folks, I want to introduce Leo Sarli. He's joined us this evening. Leo is a planning commissioner, not normal voice you might have heard, but he asked if he was able to speak, and I said yes, because someday in the near future, in less than 12 months, my time as your chair will end, and I'm still trying to find the next person who wants to be the sucker to take it on. And so with that plug, Leo, your question for Kathy or Matt?
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. I will go ahead and disassociate myself with that. No, I'm kidding. So thanks for letting me speak. I think, this building's quite lovely. And I think there's some interesting sort of architectural moves going on here that I would like to commend the early. I'm imagining this is fairly early and preliminary. But if we could go to slide 7, just to compare the two setbacks. So I will begin by stating that I think the current regulating plan ought to be retained. And I think the transition is more effective. It does sort of achieve what it set out to do. And I think it's a little bit more successful in sort of how it relates to the single residence directly behind the project. Having said that, I think the next transition that I would like to see, if we do allow, let's say, the 2 first stories to wrap that corner, I think that's not the end of the world, but I'd love to see stories 3, 4, 5, and 6 hold that setback of the 32 plus, or the 57, instead of like melding into the long horizontal bar. And I think the architect or the design team is aware of that sort of because of the material switch that they did on the slide 8, that they realized that that corner needs to be articulated. I would propose that the setback is more effective than the materials change. So that's my 2 cents on the architecture. I think, you know, I would hope that we can maintain the current regulating plan and make the project work from there. I think it does successfully achieve what it set out to do. I think if we do sort of see a reason to move to allowing more density on the site, keep the floors above 2 essentially where they are before you pull them back. That's it. That's all my comments.
Thanks, Leo. This
All
is
right.
always one, this is, the fun joys of the OG versus the zoning lines and crafting such a language, because if we move the frontage, we can't get those first 2 stories with, it's just the construct of the zoning change being there.
And then just by way of design again, if we do keep the current regulating plan, and the landscaping of that sort of beyond the form-based code triangular property piece, you could create sort of a slight little portal effect through the landscaping, behind the wall and the other one without the wall. So I think there's a lot of design opportunities here. I know it doesn't quite maximize the square footage that is usually sort of the driving agenda, and that's fully understandable, but I just feel like this is actually good form-based code, and I'm not sure that I heard good reasoning to move away from it.
Well, I guess our reasoning is that we actually think it's kind of an unintended consequence, because if you go back to the form-based code and you look at kind of where we are, if you look at the right side of the page, the Main Street frontage goes right up to the property line. And so the building right across the street from us on Glebe Road has the same condition kind of adjacent to the property line with that setback that then tapers up. And in the code, it kind of, when you're looking at RBLs, they typically would go straight across the building. So we just think that's an idiosyncrasy. And maybe it's because, see how kind of the line jogged from the left going kind of from the west coming to the east. So if you go back to kind of the building massing, all we're asking to do is kind of fill in that missing tooth as it relates to that corner. So that was our intention, and that's why we think it's the right thing to do. It almost looks like I would argue that it looks like part of the building's missing, not that it's an intentional setback.
I'm going to respectfully disagree. And if you go back to the plan, actually, there's another rationale for that setback. Because the one on the Glebe side, you're essentially facing like a property and a structure that has a lot of parallels. So from the urban fabric aspect on Glebe Road, it's mirroring what's across the street more effectively. Whereas here on this corner, there's a park across from it. So I think if we're looking at it urbanistically and not intrinsically to the design, which, I understand that you have that approach, which, obviously we all have at some point. But I think, if you compare it to the urban design, I'd say that setback actually is not idiosyncratic, and it's actually quite nuanced to the park across the street from it, making that relationship of like the setback and the way it sort of dives towards the single residence. So again, I'm just sort of observing the project, coming at it from like sort of the architectural perspective. And, I think either way, the design can be done in such a way that's effective, but that's just my perspective. But thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you. Great presentation.
And Leo, thank you. And we're so pleased to have not only Kathy, but the owner, the applicant, Yuri, joining us. So, it's always great when you can get free consultation from an architect out there. So, Leo, I think it's great. And thank you for bringing that. Steph, I saw your hand come up. So I want to let you recognize you based on. Go ahead, Steph.
Sorry, the camera was having issues. So this also goes back to past history as well. The property across the street also had a weird triangle. So the comment about, well, we're kind of losing that space, but with the property line, you are gaining the other side of that triangle, because the property owner to the south of this also was trying to say, well, this green space, we would want to take it inside and use it on the courthouse. So back during the times during Intimalis being chair, I also brought up the case of the Building Museum in Washington, D.C. That building is very much massed towards the street. The beauty of the green space is on the inside, restricted to the people who go inside the building. But if you go look at the Smithsonian's further down the street, there are gardens, and that green space is much more accessible to the general public. So the concept about where the green space is, the accessibility for the people walking on the street has been brought up with this group before. So I concur with the previous speaker with Leo, allowing that airspace in there. It still helps to bring it down to the pedestrian, because we are still trying to encourage people to walk in the area and to actually be able to see that park that's back behind there.
All right, Steph. Anybody else? Any more things out there? We've had a great conversation so far this evening. Not seeing any hands. All right. Matt, anything else from staff you want to make sure we're aware of?
No, great feedback. Again, we're trying to better understand, I think, some of the issues involved in the transitions that might happen on this site. It is unique, and I think the applicant could probably speak further to either the shadow studies that can happen or consider some of the feedback they heard tonight.
Yeah, I think we got some excellent feedback this night for both Kathy and Yuri to take back and think about what the ultimate proposal we see on the, I guess, non-preliminary filing coming up. Is Kathy's the intention still the fall is what your plans are for our members, for those waiting with bated breath?
Yeah, that's what we hope so. And also, we're coming up upon kind of the end of July, August, and that's kind of dead time to anyway. That,
yeah.
So,
all right. We appreciate everyone coming this evening. And thank you all for your presentation. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Matt, anything else this evening for us, for our OG members?
No, again, I hope everybody enjoys the summer. We'll be providing updates as we learn more about the fall schedule. And again, if something comes back to you that you didn't have a chance to highlight tonight, my email, feel free to contact me. And yeah, look forward to seeing everybody sometime this fall.
So as a reminder, everyone, no August meetings ever. And the first next possible one is September. And with that, I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your summer, and I look forward to seeing you all in the fall. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.